We're now going to dive into dissecting this break-even equation out a little bit more to better understand how a ranch can be profitable. So first we're going to start with reducing feed costs. Keep in mind that feed costs are probably going to range anywhere from $350 to $600 per head today. And so this is a big chunk of that annual cow costs. And so this is also one way that we can actually become more profitable by reducing those costs. So feed costs in a normal average precipitation year is going to be around 60% of the total cost it takes to maintain that cow on an annual basis. But on drought years, those costs can actually increase to 70 to 90%. And so we saw this with the drought in 2013, 2014, and 2015, where a lot of producers were having to purchase hay and supplement cows with hay costs, which really increased the amount of feed and their annual cow costs by a lot of money. And so as we're talking about ways to reduce feed costs, there's a few methods that we're going to discuss. First of all is going to be the concept that most low-cost producers have an increased number of grazing days, meaning that those animals are actually harvesting forage that is produced from rangeland. And that is going to decrease the amount of purchase or harvested feeds that individual operation has to purchase. And so this is the first way to decrease feed costs, is just to make sure that your cows are out grazing somewhere and that you aren't having to feed a lot of supplemental hay. The second method is to extend the green season. In California, this is pretty hard to do. So extending the green season really plays into your offsetting some of your fixed costs. So we can see extending the green season by intensively managing rangeland and irrigated pasture. We can extend the green season by rotational grazing in most ecosystems, but not all. And all of these things can be done so to increase the carrying capacity of a pasture or a piece of rangeland. So if you can increase carrying capacity, you can increase stocking rate, and this is going to reduce the amount of fixed cost per cow. And so keep in mind, fixed costs are also going to be things like taxes, land, property taxes, building, everything that has a fixed value every single year. All right, so we're still talking about reducing annual cow cost. The third method that we can reduce feed costs is by by improving rangeland and pasture forage production. So this could be things like using fertilization if it is economically beneficial. It could be holding cattle off of a certain piece or a certain pasture so it's utilized at a different grazing season. Basically anything here to increase the number of grazing days. The fourth method is to stockpile forage for the late fall, winter, and early spring. This we don't do, or we are not able to do in California very well because we are in an annual grass system. But if you're in the Midwest where they have really good, strong perennial grasses, you cannot graze a certain pasture all summer long and save it for the fall, the winter, or even the following spring. So rest rotation grazing is really common in the Midwest, but it doesn't work very well in our ecosystem here in California, where we have a Mediterranean climate and annual grasses. The fifth method to reduce feed costs is we could actually wean calves earlier. And so this is a really common practice in drought-ridden areas like Australia that goes through droughts and floods fairly regularly. We also see some producers in the U.S. use this strategy as well. So, for example, the Deseret Cattle Company in Utah, they tend to wean their calves at about 400 pounds. Um, and so they wean early to get that calf off of the cow. This will let the cow regain her body condition score so they don't have to feed a bunch of hay and supplement to increase her body condition score before going into winter. When they wean the calves at about 400 pounds, the calves will go onto a hay pasture. And so keep in mind, this is like August, September. And the trade-off here is that the ranch gets one less hay cutting, but the inputs actually go through the calves instead of into haying costs of swathing and raking and baling. And so this is one unique way that you can actually decrease feed costs, especially if you are in a drought year, or a year like we've experienced in the past, where we've lost leases because they've sold out, and you just don't have any ground to go to. So about every 3 to 4 years, we will actually end up weaning our personal calves early, just to save the cows, because we're out of feed for the cows. All right. The sixth strategy here is to make sure that you reduce feed costs. And one way to do that is to feed replacement heifers a little bit less. So you can target average daily gain on replacement heifers to be about a pound a day from the time that they're weaned until about March of the following year, if you're a spring calving operation. And then about February or March, you can start increasing the feed to be supplemented to those heifers so that they are in an increasing plane of nutrition before breeding. And so there's a little bit of cost savings that can happen on replacement heifers. You have to be a really, really good manager with this strategy, though, because you need to make sure that you're looking at your heifers a couple of times a week and really taking into account what their body condition score is, because you can actually go too far the other way, and then those cows have delayed puberty, delayed cyclicity, and delayed breeding rates. All right, so switching gears a little bit, let's talk about reducing annual cow costs by using the right genetics. And this really comes down to matching the cow to the environment. And so in a lot of commercial cow-calf operations, they will use a crossbreeding program where they are including 2 to sometimes 5 different breeds in a system. And we're going to get more into those specifics in further lectures. But this is really a system where you can create a functional cow that will survive a low-cost system. And so the quote that I always go back to is from Doc Hatfield, who was a co-founder of Country Natural Beef in Oregon. And Doc, before he passed away a few years ago, was given a talk and told us that it's not the rancher's job to produce what the cow needs to perform on. It's the cow's job to perform on what the ranch produces. And this is a really critical mindset for a low-cost producer. So they need to have enough foresight to actually bring genetics in that are going to be beneficial on their operation, because that cow needs to survive on what the ranch can supply, not the other way around. And so this concept of creating a functional cow might be changing biological type, or the mature size of the cow, or how much milk the cow produces, and their feed requirements. And so a lot of these things actually go hand in hand and are highly correlated together. So just for example, when I was in New Mexico, we ran Brangus cows in the desert system, and we needed that Bos indicus influence so the cows could be more thrifty and survive really extensive conditions. But the mature size of that cow was between 15 and 1,700 pounds. So they were really, really big cows. And so they would have a harder time surviving in our environment out here, even though it gets hot, because their mature size is going to cause them to produce more milk, and they're going to also need more total pounds of feed on a daily basis. So these are just a couple of examples of utilizing the right genetics in the crossbreeding system. When it comes to reducing annual cow costs, we can also do that through limiting our labor costs. So we can try to think through certain things like utilizing less labor at feeding. So if we are in an operation that has to feed hay through the winter, even though that's not optimal, there are operations that do that. Then feeding every other day rather than every day might make economic sense if you can get enough nutrition in front of the cows. Another way to look at this is to use less labor when making hay. And so a lot of ranches in the northern part of the West here in the U.S., they tend to spend a lot of time and energy during the summer actually making hay, so harvesting grass hay or meadow hay or timothy or whatnot. And so that takes a lot of labor. So you have labor tied up in irrigation, cutting the hay, raking it, baling it, hauling it, marketing it, you name it. So there's labor on creating hay, but there's also labor in feeding hay every day during the winter. And so if you can reduce any aspect of that, that is going to make you more profitable, and it's going to actually add less cost to the annual cow cost. Having defined calving seasons is a really, I say easy because it really is easy way of reducing labor cost. So having a 60 to a 90 day calving season is going to be more economic than having a 120 to 150 day calving season. So this is not only going to make your calf crop more uniform, but it is also going to reduce the amount of labor associated with checking calves, checking heifers, making sure calves are thrifty and are getting up and moving, etc. And finally, one of the last ways you can reduce labor costs is to improve grazing management. And so if you can create a grazing system that has you rotating cattle, maybe once every 6 weeks or once a month rather than every day, there's going to be less labor in that as well. And so just keep in mind there's lots of ways to be profitable in this business. And finally, on the herd health side of the cow cost, having a good herd health program is really essential. Again, this goes back to what you've heard me and Dr. Graham say before: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So on the cow side, we focus on limiting reproductive diseases like vibriosis and leptospirosis. On the calf side, we're going to do everything we can to reduce the amount of calf scours, because that actually ends up killing more calves and reducing the percentage calf crop. And we're also going to reduce or do as much as we can to eliminate respiratory disease in calves. And a lot of this can be done through improved nutrition. So nutrition deserves a lot of attention, a lot of penciling out through every stage of the cow-calf calendar. And so you can combat a lot of diseases and a lot of issues by just making sure that you have really good nutrition in front of your cows.